In this tutorial, we'll be discussing JavaScript variables, which we will create a function which will then retrieve variables from the user's input, and then it'll use those variables to create a sum. Same as what we would have used variables in algebra at school level. So let's go to our code, and then we'll start by entering the HTML that we need to make this work. Now, in order to follow along, you will need a basic HTML page onto which we can add the JavaScript and the HTML elements that we will use to gather the information and then to output the information back to the user. So here I've got a basic HTML page with our HTML tags, our head tags. I've got a link to a style sheet, which you don't need, but it does make it look a little prettier. And then our body section, where of course we will be doing the HTML elements that are displayed on the screen. So we will start off by creating an input box, which will be a text type. We need to assign an ID so that our JavaScript can reference this HTML element. We're going to call this one num1 because this is going to be the first number that we're going to use, or the first number that we will assign to a variable. We're going to create a little function that does some addition calculations for us. So we'll add a plus sign there. This plus sign does not influence the functionality. This is only for display purposes. Then we'll create another input box, which will also be a text type. We'll assign this one an ID and we'll call it num2. Then we'll add the equal sign, which again is not for functionality but only for display purposes. We have an input type, which we'll also call text, and we'll give this one an ID of let's call this one return. Okay, then we need to add a button which the user can click once they've entered the information, which will then invoke the JavaScript function. So yeah, let's say this is a button. The button HTML element is, we don't need an ID there, is an HTML5 HTML element which is basically the same as the input. We could have said input type equals button, would have gotten the same result. Then we want to display the word calculate on our button. So let's just save. Let's go to our browser and make sure that this is what we want. Hit refresh. So there's a graphical representation of what we're going to be doing. The user can then enter two values. These values will then be added together. And once we click calculate, JavaScript will add those two values together, and then it will display the answer in this text box on this side. So let's add that functionality. Okay, so remember, if we add JavaScript, we will add it in between the script tags. We also need to specify the type of script that we're adding, which in this case is text. Let me just spell this right. Okay, so within the script tags, we can then go and add our JavaScript. We are going to create a function which will house what we are, or the functionality that we are going to be implementing. We'll call this one addition. Remember, after the name that you specify, opening and closing parentheses, and then our opening and closing curly braces, which will then contain the code. Okay, so first of all, we need to declare our variable. And in JavaScript, we do this by using the var tag. So we'll say var x, that's then the name that you give your variable. And then we need to retrieve the information that the user has input into this text box down the bottom here. So we'll use the document object. Say get element by ID. This is called a a method. Within the parentheses, we need to specify the ID that we are referencing. And then with a dot, we can then use a few properties that are associated with the getElementById method. And now one of those is a value, which will obviously retrieve the value from an input box. Then we'll declare our next variable. Let's call it y. And here we do exactly the same thing. Document get element by ID. And of course, this one is num2. And we also want the value property. Okay, so within our function, we have now retrieved the values from the text input that the user has supplied for us. So we've got those values within our function. Now we can do some operations on those functions. So we'll declare another variable. We'll call this ans for answer. And we can say answer is, of course, equal to x plus y. And in JavaScript, it's as simple as that. X plus y. So now we have our answer that we've determined from the variable x and y. And now, of course, we need to output that answer. So we need JavaScript to send this answer back towards our HTML. So we'll use the document getElementBy method to reference the specific HTML element that we would like it to reference. And of course, in this case, we would like it to reference this input box on the other side of the equal sign so that it can return the value stored within the answer variable to that text box. So of course, this one is the ID return. And then we can return a value as well. So we can say that this value is equal to ans. Okay, I'm going to save. We're going to go over to our browser, but you will see that this function is not going to work yet, and I'll explain to you why in a second. So let's say 1 plus 1, we'll expect it to output 2. When I click calculate, nothing happens. Alright, so that is because the value that it's getting from the text box, our JavaScript is not seeing this value as a number. So we specifically need to tell JavaScript that the value coming from this text box must first be converted or passed as an integer. So we'll use the parseInt function. And we'll do the same for both variable x and variable y. Okay, so now we hit save, go to our browser, let's refresh. Now if we say 1 plus 1, we'll expect it to calculate 1 plus 1 and give us the answer of 2. Okay, now this still doesn't work. Now why is that? The second thing that you need to keep in mind is that, of course, JavaScript, it will invoke the function based on a specific event that's happening. Now the event that we are referring to now is the clicking of this button, which specifies the word calculate. So of course, JavaScript supplies us with an event called onClick, which of course is when your mouse button is clicked. So we'll say when it's on click, or when your mouse button is clicked, we need to invoke the addition function. So of course that references our function that we've just created. So let's save, we'll go to our browser, we'll refresh. Now when we say 1 plus 1, it gives us the answer of 2.